Yeah, my name's Ian, and welcome to Between the Space. I'm with my good friend and colleague and recovery buddy,
I'm
Bob.
Bob. It's good to see you, Ian. I'm happy to be here with you. We'll dive in and see what is created in the space between this week.
Yeah,
I like what you
absolutely.
talked about earlier. It's
So
unscripted. We
yeah,
do.
it's unscripted, it's unplugged, and we don't know where we're actually going, but we'll end up somewhere together. And last week we were talking about the concept of waking up and from a sleep or a slumber after having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps to steal from the 12-step programs for a moment. And just prior to coming on, myself and Bob were talking about continuing and talking about how to stay awake. And Bob has some good ideas, so I'll hand it over to Bob for a minute and then we'll just do our dialogue thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. I'll pick up where we were a minute ago, Ian. I was sharing with Ian that uh, for lots of reasons having to do with just the way my life has unfolded, I began practicing in various domains of my life, ways of staying physically fit, ways of staying, I would say, spiritually fit, and really attending to the emotional and the relational parts of my life. I'll call that psychological for right now. It was a high priority. I can remember back 30, certainly 30 or 35 years ago, I can remember running on a beach and formulating into my mind this kind of multidisciplinary personal exercise regimen I wanted to engage in, and physical exercise was just one of those. Sometime after that, somebody who's been very influential for both Ian and I, the American philosopher Ken Wilber, developed what he called integral integral life practices. I skipped ahead there. And it was interesting because it was parallel to what I was doing. He went into great detail and it was research-based and very impressive. And then when I got into recovery myself, this is a dozen years ago, I came in contact, as Ian has, with the work of John Dupuy and also Guy Duplessis, both who have written several books on integral recovery and based in integral theory, based in Ken Wilber's work. And they refer to an integral recovery practice. And so lo and behold, what I've been doing now, this is the irony as I was sharing with you, Ian, and then I'll pass the baton back to you. My various personal practices have been really important to me for decades. Everything from memorizing poetry to working out to doing shadow work. I mean, the list is fairly extensive. It did not keep me from addiction, and so I just want to be full disclosure. I'd
Yeah.
like to pretend like it did, but it didn't. And I continued to practice. I can still remember as I was descending into deeper and deeper addiction to alcohol and other drugs, that I would continue to get up in the morning and practice meditation, for example. Now, it didn't save me from addiction, but as I told you, Ian, just a few minutes ago, when I got into recovery, I realized it was going to be imperative that these practices be developed and deepened, because I certainly needed that in the context of sobriety. And so for the last dozen years, I've continued to engage in these practices, as well as helped clients that I'm working with in recovery coaching develop their own version. It's not a cookie cutter at all. So much so that even this last Saturday in the webinar that we were discussing, I shared this with clinicians from around the world, some that they provide some guidance and support for clients who are in recovery to develop what I call then just positive resources. There's a lot of focus in recovery work on decreasing or neutralizing stressors, and that's really important, but not to forget to develop positive resources right alongside of it. So, so what I can say, and this really feels true to me, and some of these practices are even more important than others. You know that for forgiveness practice, which you and I have talked about before, and I've done a fair bit of work on myself, writing and speaking about it. It's really right at the heart of my recovery. So I really credit my recovery to two things: the support I have with friends like you, Ian. That's the top of the list for me. And you could say that that's one of the practices of staying engaged with kindred souls like you and me, and it's been really important to me. And I'd say right up there with that are some form of practices. And the way I talked on Saturday of exercising body, mind, soul, spirit, and shadow. That's a simplistic one, but I break down my own practices into these 5 different categories. And I actually look forward to them. They're not burdensome at all. They're actually a joy for me. So that's a little bit of an update, and I'll throw the baton back to you, my friend. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. As I was listening to you, I was just starting to think about, well, my own recovery practice, and I can remember going in the very early days into community health in Port Macquarie down here on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and what the council did, it's got me walking along the beach, because Port Macquarie is a beautiful place. It's, pristine coastlines. It was a great place to recover. But it took all my effort just to go for a beach walk. I was that depressed. I was full of shame and remorse that I couldn't shake. It was like a heavy cloak on me. And the best I could do is get up every morning and go for a walk. And it reminds me of the saying that the counsellor gave me: if you can't talk it out, you walk it out.
That's beautiful.
And over the years, that's what I've learned, is to get those body energies, that bioenergetic part of me moving. Yeah. And I'm moving forward. And the other part that came to mind just then was the part around when we do come into recovery, and if we make it into 12-step programs or a church or some type of community group that reconnects us to something outside of ourselves. And I'm not talking about a higher power at this point or God. I'm talking about the connection with another human being. Most people, including myself, when I came into recovery, I was completely isolated and I was completely disconnected from everything. And that was a scary place to be. And then they asked us to go into a 12-step program or a church group or whatever it is. And one of the colleagues of yours that you mentioned earlier, I remember him saying to me once, and it could be just a stamp collection group, a group of people collecting stamps. It's about, at that point, it's about human connection.
Yeah.
So they're the points that I was thinking of, and how to move forward into the different levels of who we are. But really, my journey started with just getting moving.
Yeah. I like how accessible what you're saying is to all of us. Talking about walking it out. That's great. And I know you to know, Ian, that you really do value bioenergetic work, including various therapies that you participated in and provided over the years. And all so much the better. I, like you, I'm very tactile, very physical. I've spent my life in sports and in music. I'm a drummer, and what drew me to drumming was the physicality of it, and it still draws me to drumming. As you were talking about walking, in fact, I was thinking, from our talk last week that I swim while I meditate. I remember years ago telling my dear friend Keith, who just passed away last November, still dealing with the loss of Keith. I remember coming to Keith and I was trying to cross my legs and meditate. This is back in the 1980s. And I said, I'm having the hardest time with this. He just looked at me and laughed. He said, Bobby, he called me Bobby. He said, Bobby, he says, you're a drummer. When you play music, that's your meditation. And it took me a long time to really accept that. I was going to be a good Buddhist meditator, dadgummit. But, and I still do practice that. But it's the movement. And I can remember as a little boy, I started drumming when I was 9. I can remember as a little boy drumming sometimes for hours, well, not sometimes, frequently for hours I would drum and move into a meditative state. So one person's yoga, one person's lotus position is another person's drum set. How does that sound?
That's very good. We'll get that one coined. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say in response to what you shared, which was about the interpersonal part, which I really appreciate your open-mindedness and open-heartedness around that. I've shared this in our conversations before, but there'll be some people that view this that might not be aware of it. Research was done at Harvard University here in the US some years ago, and they were looking at self-help support groups, like the 12-step support groups, trying to find out what was making a difference in these groups. They called them therapeutic factors. And because it was a graduate school of psychology, they did not address the higher power concern. They would turn that to the divinity school at Harvard, which is that would be fine for them. But what they looked at were anything else that were represented healing variables in self-help support groups. And the two that came to the top of the list, you just touched on both of them. And it's not lost on me because it matches my experience as well as I believe it will resonate for you. The first one was the sense of universality, is that you can go into a group and everyone in that group understands where you're coming from. It's universal. And because there's so much shame and stigma in most principalities in the world around addiction, it's such a relief to come into a place where you're not actively shamed. In fact, you're invited to share what would in most cases be considered shameful material, and the healing that comes from that sense of universality. And the second is related to that. The second from the Harvard study was altruism, is what you I just talked about earlier, is paying it forward, that we human beings are wired in such a way, I think at the deepest evolutionary level, that what heals us is when we help others, when we get outside of ourselves, just like you just said. And any self-help support group offers that. It doesn't matter what the name or the philosophy or the practices of the group. They offer a safe haven, and they offer you a chance to reach out and help others, and in the process be helped yourself. So that's right at the heart of the practices we're talking about here. And I don't plan to stop them anytime soon. I saw a new client this last Thursday, Ian. And at the as we were walking out, he at the end of the session, he said, "Do you still attend meetings?" Because we were talking about 12-step, and I said, at some point it crossed over for me, and you and I have handled this differently. At one point, I was leading 14 groups a week in local treatment centers and still going to meetings. I thought I need to cut somewhere. The groups I was leading were all in the spirit of all that we're talking about. And at this point, I see about 25 clients a week doing recovery coaching. So I've given myself a hall pass. It's not that I'm averse to going to meetings, but I'm in meetings. In fact, I sometimes tell people, one or two or three or four or five meetings isn't enough. I have to go to about 25 meetings a week.
Yeah, that's right. And
So it's different strokes. It's the work I do, but it's very much in the spirit of everything I've learned from refuge recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous in my case, and integral recovery. At some point, I was in 3 different organizations attending groups. It was a lifeline for me.
Yeah, and myself as well. And I was just putting a little bit together in my own mind around, returning to the body or becoming regrounded.
Yeah.
To use that somatic language, to be regrounded, to get back into my body, back into my feet, feel the earth underneath me. And that beach walking that I did was tied in with a practice of the being a Gestalt therapist that I am. It was tied back into the practices of the 5 senses, walking down the beach. What do I hear? What do I see? What do I smell? Yeah. And feeling the wet sand under my feet, and then getting a little bit of salt water on my hands and tasting it, and just grounding myself daily back into the environment that I so long to escape from. And I know that's getting a little bit too out there philosophically, but that's what I've learned about myself, is I wanted to escape from who I was. You mentioned shame and stigma earlier. It was around how I felt about myself when I came into recovery. Yeah. And the darkness and the secretness of how I felt. And then from there, and then moving forward and moving out. And it took me a long time to connect in meetings. I'd be that guy who would sit there quietly and listen to what's going on and then just disappear. And I did that for years. And now I look at where I'm going with this, what I was thinking about just then when you're talking to me, I have my local meeting here that I attend. I used to be regularly, but now it's irregularly. I have, I'm a member of a martial arts club, which again is about body. So I'm doing that 2 or 3 times a week and connecting with the people I train with. I then do a Tai Chi thing with another group of people. And then I do another discussion group around spirituality and Gurdjieff's work, which was another group of people. So where all I had was a 12-step program, over the years I've been able to expand and connect with other groups. And then widen. And there's no one in my life at the moment that I'd sit down and go, I need to stay away from them. They're still in active addiction. My life's done a 180, complete 180, and I've been able to move forward. And we were talking earlier about staying awake. It was about going to sleep and then waking up. And this is how I keep myself awake. Actively being in the recovery practice, and from there doing things, because my fear is if I fall asleep, there'll be a relapse. Sure.
Carl Jung had this formula, and you'll be familiar with it because it figured into the early days of the 12-step movement. But he has this formula. It's a Latin formula. I was thinking of it this morning while I was swimming. Spiritus contra spiritum, and the idea of spiritus indicating, and I'm going to open it up to include the psychological and the spiritual, and let's do it in the spirit of what we're talking about, the physical as well, that we can develop that, and it's contra spiritum with the idea, as you know, of it's like developing oneself as a counter to the addiction to the spirits, literally spirits, as in alcohol. And it was clear to him, and I think he would be blessing us. I think that statement is very much that, is that as one cultivates one's spirit, if we look at that in the most inclusive sense, and I include embodiment and creativity and relationships, all of that's in there, that my surest guarantee of staving off the impulse to return to an old life, to spiritum, is to have an abundant current life in as many different spheres as possible. I know you're committed to that too. In fact, when you said right now about staying awake, this is that I get up early in the morning. I don't wake up all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It takes me a couple of hours, but what I do is I just gradually start priming the pump, and I do it every morning right where I'm sitting right now. It starts here for about an hour. It's still dark outside. And then, as you know, Colleen, my wife, and I go out swimming, and we swim for an hour, and I'm continuing the practice. After a couple of hours, I am woken up. I mean, literally, we're working with this image of being awake. I literally wake up kind of all cylinders gradually every morning. I don't miss very many mornings. Maybe if I'm really ill, but I have to be really ill even to miss it. And so it literally is how I wake up, but it's also keeping me awake in the deeper and the broader sense that you're talking about. Yeah. And I'm extremely grateful for that. I don't credit. Actually, I feel like it's grace that makes this so desirable to me. The discipline doesn't feel like it's an act of will for me. I guess you could say it is. What gets Bob out of bed in the morning? Well, what gets me out of bed in the morning is the desire to be alive. And I wake up gradually into that on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it is one step at a time. It's like that image of me walking down the beach that. I can talk about my practice 30 years forward to today, but then I still think about the person who might be listening who's just coming in and feeling really blah about everything. Yeah. And And it is, I sit on the side of my bed and I wake, kind of go, 5:30 in the morning, and I've got a drive for 35 minutes to get to a particular training group, and be there to start. And so, yeah, a few times I do. I just go, no, not today, and smack myself in the bed. And that's the human part of me, and allow myself to do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the person coming through now, just starting this is just start with a walk. Yeah. Drink your coffee and eat your biscuits at AA meetings and have the chat. And then go for a walk the next day. And then just keep. Because as much as we get in the body, and philosophically, then at some point I have to leave the body again. And, it's a journey.
I like that very much. I like the humanness and the kindness to yourself. In this webinar I did on Saturday, I called it courageous self-kindness. That it's heart-centered. It's heart-centered. And I said I actually prefer the term self-kindness. I've never heard somebody use that before, but I like that term over self-care. Self-kindness actually communicates more of a gentleness, more of a tenderness to me than even self-care. It doesn't matter what the terms are, though. It's just that whatever we can do, it includes being kind with ourselves around these practices. But like this morning, I got up and my wife wanted to go swimming sooner, and it cut into my meditation time. I was writing some poetry and doing this and that. And I'm just fine with that. We went swimming, and I just realized I'll get to it later today. Not in a sense of feeling a compulsion. It's just joyful for me. So I wrapped around it. And so you just flex with it. And some days you're tired, you just rest, and you'll catch up with yourself later. It doesn't really matter. But I really like the idea of starting with the little baby steps. I think I came across this recently. Lao Tzu says something like, the great task is accomplished by a series of small acts, just little baby steps, and then eventually you have the great task. And I used to have this as a wallpaper on my computer, a picture of the Matterhorn. and I had that little statement by Lao Tzu down below. The great act is accomplished by a series of, or the great task is accomplished by a series of small acts. I thought, if you climb a mountain, if you climb the Matterhorn, you just start one little tiny step at a time.
And the other Taoist image is it just came to mind then, is that little baby steps, is how do you, a pile of rice paper starts with the first sheet.
That's great. That's a great image.
Let's keep throwing one more on.
For me, this is the incentive for sobriety, is that the payoff is so great. My connection to you, my connection to my wife, my connection to myself, my connection to my own sense of higher power, which I look at as an interior quality as much as external. My connection this morning, I was reviewing a favorite poem by D.H. Lawrence, simply called Vitality. I named the Vitality Project after this poem, and I came back to it. I'm committing it to memory once again. It's been several years, and that's what he's talking about, is living a full life. I really want that, and what we're talking about is made possible. It makes sobriety or recovery worth cultivating, because the payoff is so great. There's no comparison